There was a time when virtually every occasion I flew back into Canada, the customs officers would stop me and search my bags. Back then, I traveled the world working for women's rights and had a passport filled with interesting visas. But I traveled lightly, so I wondered whether it was something about the way I looked or a strange note in my file. Like so many of us who enter this country, I learned to dread customs and the frustrating bag opening delays after a long journey. And then a friend said I need to change my whole approach, and she gave me this special technique. I thought it was ridiculous, but frankly, I had nothing to lose. So the next time entering Canada, as I stood in the queue, I approached the customs officer and said, "I love you, in my inside voice. Tall Mr. Customs peers down at me and, as usual, peppers me with questions. And then he asks for my business card. I said, "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think you can ask for that." He said, "No, it's not for me, it's for my mother. She would just love to become a member of your women's rights organization." Since that day, my bags have not been opened. Clearly, my friend was on to something. For 30 years, I have been giving talks on gender, human rights, or climate. This is the very first one I have given on compassion. Compassion is the awareness of the deep connection between us and all living things. And I have learned the secret power of compassion as an activist. My moments with Mr. Customs gave me a hint back then just how differently things turn out if we're open to others in new ways. But it was years later before I could really practice compassion, forged from the understanding that we are all interconnected. Each one of us breathe the same air. Each one of us descend from the same descendants. From space, we can see that we live on a planet that is one living organism. It's people like Nelson Mandela who showed us the courage of compassion by actually forgiving the apartheid leaders who beat and jailed him. And he gave birth to a new nation. And we also know that he learned to cultivate this conscious compassion, which means that that potential belongs in all of us. The world right now needs some unifying. So imagine if more of us really knew how to practice compassion. I am convinced, based on my experience, we could not only heal ourselves, we could build healthy communities and even save Mother Earth. I have dedicated my career to the advancement of human rights and justice. And like so many of us who do this work, I first learned how to fight and confront before practicing compassion. In my 30s, I was leading a global feminist organization working to transform the laws and cultures that were keeping women and girls down. In the face of profound discrimination and misogyny around the world, I learned to sharpen my determination and convictions. In my early 40s, I became the CEO of a global humanitarian organization that worked around the world with 15 million people living in extreme poverty. I traveled endlessly and was witness to profound suffering in refugee camps and urban slums. I listened to countless stories by women and girls who had survived unspeakable violence. There was so much to do, so much injustice, and so many who didn't care. I think it was my anger and my righteousness that kept me going. But eventually, all the conflict and the brutal 24/7 demands, they took their toll. After visits through 26 countries in just 9 months, I ended up very sick in a hospital in Kathmandu. Desperate for some peace and part of the recovery, my partner and I retreated to a little place outside of Johannesburg. There, in the natural beauty and contemplative space known as Quiet Mountain, I had a bit of an epiphany. Not only was this way of the warrior practically killing me, it was not necessarily leading to deep change. I was contributing to division. While I was out in the world fighting, so too were my adversaries. And even within our movements, we were battling each other. We were all shielding ourselves behind being right and others being wrong. If we were going to solve global problems, we had to stop grasping to our different positions. Just as the life in forests and rivers and oceans show us, everything grows and transforms in connection to each other. To remain fixed is unnatural. Instead of blaming and judging others, we can focus on their motivations and fears and what connects us. Compassion simply starts with being open and getting curious. If I was to lead change, I needed to find new ways to drive solutions. It wasn't long after that my work took me to northern Ethiopia to see a successful program that had lowered violence against girls. I was so impressed by the community's achievements. I asked the leader of the group if there was a message she'd like me to take back to my colleagues. She took my hands, looked into my eyes, and said, "Pray for the rain." Pray for the rain. Suddenly, I was so embarrassed. Here we were so fixed on these successful anti-violence programs, yet the women were preoccupied with the rain for their survival. They could no longer count on the weather to feed their families. This was climate change and their greatest obstacle to a life with rights and dignity. Why weren't more of us making this connection? It had such an impact on me. It wasn't long after that I agreed to take the lead role at Greenpeace Canada. I remember Skyping my mom from Johannesburg to give her the news that I was going to be coming back to Canada, but she was a bit taken aback. "Joe, you're going to work for Greenpeace? Aren't they radicals? How could you?" "No, Mom, not radicals." And I could because I saw the urgency of climate change as a human rights issue. But admittedly, what also attracted me to the organization was its acknowledgement that it had to change. The environmental movement was not going to save the planet by issuing scientific reports that would somehow enlighten policymakers or drop a few banners. The organization wanted to campaign with people and inspire a billion acts of environmental courage. I was excited to join the organization and support this new vision. And when I joined, we had just launched a campaign to save the Arctic from oil drilling and overfishing. And as part of our new approach, we wanted to work with and listen to the very people that called the Arctic their home. But the Inuit, the indigenous people who live in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland, they hated Greenpeace, and with good reason. See, back in the 70s and 80s, Greenpeace had a campaign against the commercial seal hunt, which many animal rights groups piled onto, which led to a ban on seal pelts and ultimately to an EU ban by the EU of all seal products. This decimated one of the core sources of income for the Inuit. If we were to proceed with this campaign, we needed to face their pain and anger and acknowledge how we had contributed to their trauma. So for the very first time, we published a public apology. And right around the same time, up in Nunavut, in an Inuit hamlet known as Clyde River, the mayor, Jerry Natanine, was fighting the Canadian government and a consortium of oil companies who were about to start seismic blasting. This is a horrendous and deafening means to locate underwater oil. Imagine dynamite going off every 10 seconds. They were really concerned about what impact this would have on the sea mammals. and their food and livelihoods were at stake. Not getting any clear answers, they could not give their consent for this project to go ahead. But Jerry was running out of time, and he didn't know who or what could help. And then he saw the Greenpeace apology. He saw our shared concern for the environment. And so, with the blessing of his community and its elders, he courageously reached out to us to see if we could help them stop seismic blasting. That was the beginning of a beautiful relationship and a journey of forgiveness and healing. And while it does not absolve us of our past, nor signify forgiveness from all the Inuit, it did allow us to support the community for the past 3 years and take their fight all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And in July, we all won in this landmark case. Inuit rights were defended. No seismic blasting will take place. This precious Arctic ecosystem will be protected from oil spills, and the whales and the narwhals have a much greater chance of survival. Compassion is the awareness of the deep connection between us and all living things. With more compassion, we can not only transform the politics of division and conflict, we as humans can embrace our responsibility for the beautiful life-sustaining systems our lives are completely intertwined with. The forests that give us air to breathe, the plants that give us our medicine, the water that gives us life. And just as Jerry reached out to us, I am more committed than ever to reach out to those who might not trust us or with whom we don't see eye to eye. And compassion doesn't mean we naively work with those who don't trust us and who are against us. We still absolutely need to confront injustice. It does mean, though, finding those clever and discerning approaches that actually build openings. It enables us to find those solutions between the environment, between the economy, and between human rights. For me, the risk has been worth it. I'm now an activist with less stress and more joy. The world doesn't need any more warriors or leaders who divide us. The world needs more of us to stop blaming and judging and get curious and receptive and get over ourselves a little bit. With the power of compassion, we could build resilient connections that could change this world and even save life on this planet. Compassion might just be the most courageous weapon we have. Thank you. Thank you.